The first thing the tactical action officer noticed was not the number. It was the geometry. The destroyer is operating in the South China Sea, 140 nautical miles northwest of Palawan, open water with no traffic constraints and no geographic choke points. The ship is free to maneuver in any direction. The adversary had chosen to approach from 7 bearings simultaneously: 287, 301, 314, 328, 341, 355, and 008, evenly spaced across an 81-degree arc separated by exactly 11.5 degrees per group. Not approximately, precisely. One group deviated by 0.4 degrees. The other 6 were exact to within 0.1 degree. Exact spacing between approach vectors is not a characteristic of human-coordinated drone operations. Human operators produce approximations, operational urgency, varied launch platforms, terrain masking, timing variations. The geometry of human-planned swarming has texture. This was precise. The TAO logged it as an observation without a conclusion. 80 contacts. 7 groups of 11 to 12 platforms each, range 88 kilometers, speed 165 kilometers per hour, altitude 450 meters, stable. Lateral spacing approximately 180 meters between platforms within each group. Radar cross-section 0.02 to 0.06 square meters per contact. Nothing in the behavioral profile was beyond what Shahed 136 operators had demonstrated elsewhere. But Shahed 136 operators did not produce 11.5 degree spacing with 0.1 degree precision across 7 simultaneous groups. Something was coordinating these platforms in real time, full track on all 80. I want position, velocity, altitude maximized on every file. Don't lose anything. And I want someone watching for behavioral changes, not just closure rates. If these contacts change what they're doing relative to each other, I need to know. Running count, 2:33 a.m., second 0, 80 contacts, 7 groups, bearing 287-008, range 88 kilometers, 165 kilometers per hour, altitude 450 meters. VLS, SM 6x8, SM 2x24, ESSM x 32, RAM 21, CIWS fore and aft, 100%. No engagements authorized. Behavioral monitoring, active. The engagement model that the fire control system recommended was standard doctrine. Allocate SM6 to the highest priority contacts at outer ring range, transition to SM2 and ESSM as ranges compressed, CIWS for terminal intercepts. Against 80 contacts at standard hit rates, the system's projection was workable. Not comfortable, but workable. The outer ring could neutralize 20 to 24 contacts, the middle ring another 35 to 40, CIWS handling the remainder. The TAO approved the engagement queue, but did not authorize weapons release yet. He was watching the contact behavior. 3 minutes after first detection, the contacts did something that no previous drone engagement in the threat library had documented. The 7 groups began to converge, not toward the ship, toward each other. The outermost groups on bearings 287 and 008 accelerated slightly. The inner groups on bearing 328 decelerated slightly, and within 90 seconds of the behavior change, the 7 groups had compressed from an 81-degree arc, spanning approximately 22 kilometers of lateral width at 88 kilometers range, into a tighter cluster spanning 14 kilometers of lateral width. The lateral spacing had reduced from 11.5 degrees per group to 8.1 degrees per group. The formation was concentrating, not because the platforms were being told to converge by a human operator who had observed the ship's defensive posture and decided to tighten the formation. There had been no time for a human observer to make that decision, transmit it, receive acknowledgement, and see the behavioral change execute across all 7 groups simultaneously. The reaction time was under 90 seconds from the moment the SPY-6 began actively interrogating the contacts at maximum update rate. The swarm had detected that it was being tracked more precisely and had responded by reducing the coverage arc the defensive system needed to manage. The TAO read the contact log twice. He said nothing for 4 seconds. "It's reacting to us." The FLIR operator pulled up the thermal signatures on the lead group. 11 contacts at 84 kilometers, each one a small hot point against the cooler sky. The heat signature of a piston engine burning fuel at cruise power, the same signature that made Shahed 136 platforms detectable on infrared at ranges the radar sometimes missed. The signatures were uniform. 11 platforms, 11 near-identical thermal outputs, maintaining 180 meters spacing with precision that did not waver. Autonomous swarm coordination typically produces behavioral latency, a lag between a decision and implementation, visible as a momentary disruption in formation coherence. There was no lag here. The change had executed simultaneously across all 7 groups with no observable disruption. The platforms were not receiving update commands from a ground station. They were operating on a shared decision model, each platform independently computing the same optimal response at the same moment. This was not a Shahed 136. This was what happened when someone put a different brain in a Shahed 136 class airframe. Weapons free. SM-6 on the 8 highest priority contacts in the lead group. Fire now. SM-6 cells 1 through 8. 8 missiles in 1.6 seconds. 8 tracks curving northwest toward the lead cluster on bearing 328, the geometric center of the formation. Time to intercept, 68 seconds. The swarm responded in 4.2 seconds. The lead group on bearing 328, the one with SM-6 already in flight toward it, descended from 450 meters to 180 meters in a coordinated dive that the radar system tracked, but the fire control computer had to resolve mid-flight on 4 of the 8 SM-6, already airborne. The 2 groups flanking the lead cluster on bearings 314 and 341 accelerated simultaneously from 165 kilometers per hour to 210 kilometers per hour. The outer groups on 287 and 008 held speed, but each split into 2 subformations, the rear half of each group beginning a wide lateral separation that increased their arc span back toward the original 81-degree coverage. In under 5 seconds, the swarm had identified the incoming SM-6 tracks, determined which group was the engagement priority, executed a coordinated altitude evasion on that group, accelerated the flanking groups to exploit the engagement window, and begun a flank spread maneuver to re-widen the lateral coverage arc. None of this had been pre-programmed. The SM-6 salvo had not been anticipated in the mission plan. The swarm had observed the incoming interceptors, computed the optimal collective response, and executed it across all 80 platforms in under 5 seconds. Running count, 2:37 a.m., second 244, 80 contacts, 7 groups plus 2 splitting, lead group descending to 180 meters, flanking groups accelerating, SM 6 times 8 in flight, SM 6 cells, 0 remaining, SM2, 24, ESSM, 32, RAM, 21, CIWS, 100%, cost $16.8 million. Time to SM6 intercept results, 28 seconds. The SM6 intercept results were mixed in a way that had not been predictable. 6 of 8 interceptors achieved proximity detonation on their designated targets. Good results against the altitude dive maneuver, the SM-6 active seeker resolving the track in time, 6 contacts neutralized, 2 SM-6 missed. Their targets had descended faster than the seeker reacquisition could compensate for. The contacts dropping below the intercept solution altitude during the terminal phase. 2 SM-6 rounds expended, 2 contacts surviving. 74 contacts remaining. But the swarm did not simply continue on the same bearing with 2 fewer platforms. In the 8.3 seconds between the SM-6 intercept events and the next radar update cycle, the surviving members of the lead group redistributed. The 6 contacts that had been in the positions adjacent to the 6 that were neutralized closed the lateral gaps left by the neutralizations. The formation reconstituted itself. 11 positions, 6 survivors now occupying 6 of those positions. The remaining 5 positions absorbed back into the flanking groups, which had also redistributed. The geometric spacing restabilized. The formation was coherent again before the next radar sweep completed. The SM-6 had eliminated 6 platforms. The swarm had responded as if the 6 were irrelevant, because to its collective decision model, they were. The model did not care about individual platforms. It cared about coverage and approach geometry. 6 fewer platforms meant 6 fewer units of coverage. The remaining platforms redistributed to maintain optimal coverage with available resources. An optimization running on every platform simultaneously, continuously, in real time. SM-2 cells 1 through 8 fired against the 2 accelerating flanking groups at 31 kilometers. 8 interceptors against 16 contacts on bearings 314 and 300-41. The flanking groups had been the fastest closing threat since their 210 kilometers per hour acceleration. Intercept calculation. 7 of 8 SM-2 should achieve proximity detonation at the rated 75% hit probability. Actual result: 4 intercepts, 4 misses, 4. The 4 misses shared a characteristic. Each targeted contact had displaced 40 to 60 meters laterally within the final 8 seconds of the SM-2 terminal phase. Not random evasion, each contact had identified the incoming seeker acquisition and displaced precisely far enough to defeat the proximity fuze-radius. The SM-2 fuze-radius is documented in open-source technical analyses. The swarm's 40 to 60 meter displacement was consistent with that specification, loaded as a parameter and computed as the minimum required displacement. 12 contacts neutralized, 4 survivors rejoining formation, lateral spacing reconstituted within 2 radar sweeps. Running count: 2:40 a.m., second 447, 62 contacts. 2 survivors from SM-6 miss, 4 survivors from SM-2 evasion, all reintegrated into formation. SM-6, 0. SM-2, 16 remaining. ESSM, 32. RAM, 21. CIWS, 100%. Formation now. Range 24 kilometers, speed 195 kilometers per hour average, altitude, mixed 180 to 450 meters. Cost, $26.4 million. The weapons officer fired SM-2 cells 9 through 16 against the next priority cluster at 24 kilometers. 8 launches, 4 intercepts, 4 misses, identical evasion geometry to the previous SM-2 engagement. The swarm had confirmed the evasion algorithm was effective and was applying it universally. Every contact now being actively tracked by an incoming SM-2 was displacing 45 to 55 meters in the final 8 seconds. SM-2 inventory, 8 remaining. 54 contacts, range 19 kilometers. The TAO made a decision he had not planned to make at this point in the engagement. Hold remaining SM-2. ESSM takes primary from here. I want the 8 SM2 for contingency at close range. 54 contacts at 19 kilometers, ESSM range. The ESSM engagement opened at 2:42 a.m. against the lead and flanking elements now at 17 kilometers on 5 simultaneous bearings. The swarm's formation had spread back to a 77-degree arc as the outer groups completed their re-expansion maneuver, the same width it had started at, restored across 20 kilometers of approach. The defensive system now had to cover 77 degrees of simultaneous contact. ESSM cells 1 through 12. 12 launches against 12 contacts, 4.1 second sequence, 8 intercepts, 4 misses, the same 45 to 55 meter displacement evasion, now adapted to ESSM terminal parameters. The swarm had transitioned its evasion algorithm from SM2 proximity fuse geometry to ESSM proximity fuse geometry in the interval between the last SM2 engagement and the first ESSM engagement. It had observed the ESSM flight profile, computed the fuse radius from behavioral data, and updated the evasion parameter across all remaining platforms simultaneously. The evasion distance, 28 to 35 meters, smaller than the SM2 displacement, consistent with a tighter ESSM fuse radius, characterized from 2 data points in real time. Running count, 2:43 a.m., second 598, 46 contacts. Range, 13 to 16 kilometers, 5 bearing arcs, 77 degree spread. SM60. SM2, 8 held. ESSM 20 remaining. RAM 21. CIWS 100%. Swarm evasion active on all contacts. Cost $31.8 million. Time elapsed 10 minutes 18 seconds. The weapons officer switched to firing ESSM in pairs per contact, bracketing the evasion displacement with 2 detonations at slightly different geometries. 2 rounds doubled hit probability, but halved the contacts ESSM could engage before the magazine emptied. ESSM cells 13 through 20, 8 launches in pairs, 4 contacts. 2 contacts intercepted. 2 contacts displaced diagonally, a vector that defeated both rounds of each pair simultaneously. The swarm had observed the pairing tactic across 2 engagements and adapted the evasion geometry on the 3rd and 4th pairs. ESSM remaining, 12. Contacts remaining, 42. Range, 8 kilometers. The RAM launcher engaged at 8 kilometers. The swarm was now inside the RAM engagement envelope. RAM cells 1 through 10 against 10 contacts across the forward arc, 7 intercepts, 3 misses. The evasion algorithm had now been applied to the RAM seeker profile as well. The displacement geometry adjusted again to a smaller radius, consistent with RAM fuse parameters. The swarm was characterizing and countering each defensive system in sequence as it transitioned through each ring. Running count, 2:45 a.m., second 732, 35 contacts. Range, 5 to 8 kilometers. SM60. SM2, 8 remaining. ESSM, 12 remaining. RAM, 11. CIWS, 100%. Swarm evasion, active, system-specific parameters on all contacts. Cost, $40.7 million. Time elapsed, 12 minutes, 12 seconds. The last 8, SM2 fired against 8 contacts at 6 kilometers on the bearings that presented the most acute angular approach. 6 intercepts, 2 misses, evasion active. The middle ring was empty. SM2, 0. ESSM cells 21 through 28 against 8 contacts at 4.5 to 5 kilometers. 6 intercepts, 2 misses, ESSM, 4 remaining. RAM cells 11 through 16 against 6 contacts at 3.8 to 4.2 kilometers. 5 intercepts, 1 miss. Running count 2:46 a.m., second 812, 19 contacts. Range 2 to 4 kilometers. SM60, SM20, ESSM4, RAM 5, CIWS 100%. Formation still coherent, 19 contacts maintaining relative spacing. Cost, $48.6 million. Time elapsed, 13 minutes, 32 seconds. 19 contacts inside 4 kilometers, with 4 ESSM, 5 RAM, and 2 CIWS mounts as the remaining defense. The swarm had maintained coherent formation through the SM6 ring, the SM2 ring, and the ESSM ring. 19 survivors from 80 had adapted their evasion parameters through 3 separate defensive systems in real time and were now inside the range at which CIWS was the primary and nearly sole defensive layer. The CIWS engagement was different. CIWS did not use a proximity fuse. It fired a continuous 20-millimeter stream requiring a target to physically fly through or around it. A 45-meter displacement defeated a proximity fuse. Against CIWS, a 45-meter displacement only moved the target 45 meters. It did not help unless the airframe could displace that distance in the half-second between acquisition and burst. At 165 to 210 kilometers per hour, a Shahed 136 class airframe could not. The evasion algorithm that had countered every prior ring had no solution for continuous stream geometry. The swarm appeared to recognize this. In the final 2.8 kilometers, the 19 surviving contacts accelerated simultaneously to maximum airframe speed. At 240 kilometers per hour versus the 165 kilometers per hour cruise speed, 19 contacts at 2.8 kilometers represented 42 seconds of CIWS engagement time instead of 61. Each compressed second was a round the CIWS did not fire between contacts. The swarm could not evade CIWS, so it compressed the engagement window. CIWS forward acquired at 2,200 meters. 11 contacts within the forward mount's primary engagement cone on a 45-degree arc to port forward. CIWS aft covered 8 contacts on a 35-degree arc to starboard forward. Burst. Contact 1 at 2,050 meters. 0.4 seconds, 30 rounds. Fragmented. Dome rotation. Contact 2, 1,940 meters. 0.3 seconds, 22 rounds. Fragmented. The rhythm established in the first 2 engagements was sustained for 11 contacts on the forward mount over 34 seconds. Average burst, 0.38 seconds. Average rounds per engagement, 28. 11 contacts neutralized by CIWS forward. Rounds expended, 311. Remaining, 1,239. CIWS aft worked through 8 contacts on the starboard forward arc over 28 seconds. 7 intercepts. 1 contact, the final one on the aft mount's engagement sequence, executed a terminal roll maneuver in the last 400 meters that displaced it laterally by 12 meters. Insufficient to defeat the CIWS stream entirely, but enough to redirect the burst through the tail rather than the airframe center. The platform lost its propulsion and entered an uncontrolled descent. The payload initiated on water impact 60 meters off the starboard quarter. The detonation sent a column of water 25 meters high and a concussive pressure wave across the water surface. The shock wave reached the hull. The hull plating registered it. No structural damage. A seismic event felt through every deck. The 4 remaining ESSM fired against the last 4 contacts, still at 3 to 4 kilometers, while the CIWS was working through the close-range contacts. 3 intercepts, 1 miss. Running count, 2:48 a.m., second 924, 1 contact remaining. CIWS forward, 82%. CIWS aft, 84%. ESSM, 0. SM2, 0. SM6, 0. RAM, 5 remaining. Single contact at 1,400 meters, starboard bow. Cost, $48.6 million. Time elapsed, 15 minutes, 24 seconds. One contact. Bearing 352. Range 1,400 meters. Speed 240 kilometers per hour. Maximum airframe velocity. Altitude 45 meters above the water surface. The CIWS aft mount was tracking it. The mount rotated 12 degrees right, barrel depressed to 8 degrees above horizon. In the 4.1 seconds between acquisition and weapons release, the platform descended to 6 meters above the water surface. The radar returned, merging with sea clutter below the CIWS targeting radar's reliable detection floor. The platform had entered the ground clutter layer. CIWS switched to FLIR. The engine thermal signature at 1,100 meters was detectable but degraded. Pre-dawn sea surface temperature differentials were narrowing, reducing contrast between the engine plume and background. FLIR track quality, marginal. 2 RAM rounds fired. First, guided by the FLIR handoff, detonation 6 meters from the contact, within lethal radius. The platform's guidance system failed. The airframe entered a shallow climb from loss of control input, rising from 6 meters to 28 meters in a 0.8-second ballistic arc. CIWS forward reacquired at 28 meters altitude, 780 meters range. Burst 0.9 seconds, 68 rounds. The contact fragmented at 710 meters. The payload initiated in the fragmentation cloud, a sharp, flat crack above the waterline, 710 meters off the port bow. Fragments from the 40-kilogram warhead scattered across a 90-meter radius. 7 fragments reached the hull above the waterline. 3 impacted the forward sensor housing. 1 fragment penetrated the waveguide conduit for the SPY-6 forward array sector. Not the array, the conduit. The forward sector degraded from full function to 70% scan coverage. The radar continued operating in degraded mode. The CIC watch team reclassified it as mission degraded rather than mission neutralized within 60 seconds. The engagement was over. At 2:49 a.m., the SPY-6 in degraded mode tracked no inbound contacts within 20 kilometers. The radar sweep was clean, except for the clutter return at sea surface level that had masked the final contact and which was now simply sea clutter again. Total duration from first detection to final intercept, 16 minutes, 28 seconds. In CIC, the watch team stayed at battle stations for 3 additional minutes. Nobody spoke except in operational terms. Bearing report, radar status, FLIR clear. The functional conversation left no space for what the watch team was beginning to understand about what they had just faced. The damage assessment team reported at 3:04 a.m. SPY-6 forward sector, 70% function, degraded. Will restore to full function on replacement of conduit section, estimated 6 to 8 hours. All other systems fully operational. Forward sensor housing, cosmetic damage from 3 fragment impacts, no functional compromise. Hull, no watertight damage. Personnel. 2 crew members on the 01 deck had minor fragment injuries from the starboard quarter detonation shockwave, both treated and returned to duty. The magazine assessment read at 3:06 a.m. produced no silence. The watch team had been tracking the expenditure throughout the engagement, and the numbers were known before they were read aloud. SM6, 0 of 8. SM2, 0 of 24. ESSM, 0 of 32. RAM, 3 of 21 remaining. CIWS forward, 82%, approximately 16.5 seconds of fire. CIWS aft, 82% approximately. The outer, middle, and close-range missile inventories were fully expended. The The ship was operating on CIWS and 3 RAM rounds. Total interceptors expended to neutralize 80 contacts, 8 SM6, 24 SM2, 32 ESSM, 18 RAM. Hit rate across all systems, 78% average. Against a non-adaptive swarm at published hit rates, the expected performance was 82%. The 4-point degradation was attributable entirely to the evasion algorithm. Each system had performed within specification against non-evading contacts and underperformed by an average of 18% against contacts employing the displacement algorithm. The 18% degradation had cost the equivalent of 14.4 additional effective interceptors across the engagement. 14 interceptors worth of capacity, consumed not by the swarm's size, but by the swarm's ability to learn. The final accounting assembled at 4:15 a.m. placed precise numbers around what the watch team already understood qualitatively. 80 airframes at commercial derivative manufacturing cost, approximately $8,000 to $15,000 per unit, call it $12,000 average. 80 platforms, $960,000. AI coordination software development. Unquantifiable from open sources, but the hardware cost of distributing a coordination algorithm across 80 edge compute modules was estimated at $500 to $2,000 per platform, call it $1,000 average. AI hardware, $80,000. Total adversary material investment, approximately $1.04 million. U.S. munitions expended, 8 SM6 at $2.1 million to $16.8 million, 24 SM2 at $1.2 million to $28.8 million, 32 ESSM at $450,000 to $14.4 million, 18 RAM at $900,000 to $16.2 million, CIWS ammunition, approximately $27,000. Total, $76.2 million. Exchange ratio, 73-1 in the adversary's favor. The ratio was the highest of any engagement documented in this theater. But the ratio was not the defining datum. The defining datum was this. The AI coordination layer had increased the operational effectiveness of a $1 million investment by a factor measurable in the hit rate degradation across all 4 defensive rings. The AI had not made the swarm bigger. It had made the swarm smarter. The difference in cost between an 80-platform swarm with and without AI coordination, approximately $80,000. The difference in outcome, 14 additional effective contacts reaching the inner ring. $80,000 in distributed edge compute hardware had forced $6.3 million in additional interceptor expenditure. That was the return on the AI layer specifically. The second datum. The swarm had characterized the proximity fuze-radius of SM2, ESSM, and RAM from live engagement data and adapted its evasion geometry to each. The next swarm would arrive with those parameters preloaded. The learning from this engagement would persist. Each engagement against an AI-coordinated swarm was, in part, a training session for the adversary's algorithm. Emergency resupply transmitted at 4:47 a.m. Full VLS reload plus RAM replenishment. ETA from the prepositioned logistics vessel. 4 days. SPY-6 conduit repair commenced at 3:22 a.m., estimated completion at 9 a.m. During the repair window, degraded forward radar sector, 3 RAM rounds exhausted interceptor inventory. If a second swarm launched in that 6-hour window, the forward sector degradation reduced detection range against low-altitude, small contacts by approximately 35%. The adversary had not produced that vulnerability deliberately. The vulnerability existed anyway. The TAO submitted his after-action report at 5:50 a.m. The executive summary was 2 sentences. The engagement was successful. The system that conducted it will be more effective in the next engagement than it was in this one, and we will not know by how much until we see the next engagement. Running count, 2:49 a.m., second 988, all 80 contacts neutralized, SM60, SM20, ESSM 0, RAM 3 remaining, CIWS forward 82%, CIWS aft 82%, SPY6 forward sector 70% degraded, 2 crew minor injuries, total cost $76.2 million, adversary cost $1.04 million, exchange ratio 73-1, time elapsed 16 minutes 28 seconds. The ship transmitted its resupply request at 4:47 a.m. 4 days. For 4 days, a destroyer that had just neutralized 80 AI-coordinated platforms had 3 RAM rounds, 2 CIWS mounts, and a radar operating at 70% in its forward sector. The adversary's coordination algorithm had processed 16 minutes of live engagement data against 4 U.S. defensive systems. It had characterized proximity fuse radii, adapted evasion geometry in real time, executed simultaneous formation maneuvers across 80 platforms with sub-5-second reaction time, and produced an 18% average hit rate degradation across the entire engagement. The algorithm would not forget any of it. The next swarm that flew this bearing would arrive knowing the SM2 fuse radius, the ESSM fuse radius, and the RAM fuse radius. It would arrive knowing the CIWS engagement tempo and the burst duration pattern. It would arrive having been trained on this ship's exact defensive response sequence for 16 minutes and 28 seconds. $73 spent for every dollar the adversary invested. And the adversary's investment compounded across every engagement, while the U.S. defense reset to 0 each time. The math was not the weapon. The learning was.